Tzarayim Tovim. I know this is a little bit later. It's just been, again, a very erratic schedule. This week, we're focusing on Parshat VaYechi. I've entitled the talk Last Words of a Father to His Children. Before I start, just to remind everyone, Ken and I are leaving for Israel tomorrow morning. We will be there a little bit more than 2.5 weeks. I will not be recording these shirim, which are Parshat Shemot and VaYera, during that time. Instead, I will share some collective thoughts from the first 3 Parshiot of Sefer Shemot the following week. So the next time I will be doing this is on Thursday, January the 18th. Oh, right, and I'm doing this on Wednesday, not on Thursday, because tomorrow at this time we will be on a plane. Okay, so in our Parsha, we see the final blessings that Yaakov will give to his children as he knows that his life is ending. Similarly, in our Haftarah, we hear the final words of blessing that King David bestows on his son Shlomo. A profound difference is that while Yaakov blesses all of his children, King David, Melech David, only bestows these words of wisdom and hope on one of his children, Shlomo, in our text. The entire process and words included in these blessings themselves show marked differences. In the first instance, Yaakov has words for all of his sons. Many of these final statements to each of his sons may not feel like blessings, and this is often discussed by Chazal. But maybe they are blessings in recognizing the actual reality of each of the individual personalities as opposed to what he, as their parent, might have wished for. We all know as parents, we have dreams for our children. We want certain things for them. Sometimes they're fulfilled. Many times they are not. We hear his own regrets and recalibrations, a concept from a few weeks ago here as well. Maybe Yaakov is saying, I see you as you are, not just my reflection of what I wanted and hoped you would be. For example, we'll begin with chapter 49, verse 3. Reuven, b'chorata kochi, reshit oni yeter sha'at v'yeter az. You are my firstborn, Reuven. Ozi, my strength, and the first of my might. Yeter sha'at v'yeter az. You should have been, in parentheses, superior in rank and superior in power. You were fit, says Rashi, to be superior over your brothers with the priesthood. But, of course, this will not happen. Instead, verse 4, Pachaz kamayim, you have the restlessness of water. Therefore, you will not have this superiority, for you ascended upon your father's couch. You profaned your father by doing so. The restlessness and the haste of which you have hastened to display your anger, teaches Rashi, is similar to water, which hastens its course. You will not have this superiority. And this is a reference to when Reuven went and lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine. In the Gemara, Shabbat 55b explains, and the verse ascribes to him as if he had actually had intimacy with Bilhah. But Rashi wants us to believe, according to the Midrash, and repeated in the Talmud, that Reuven just rearranged the bed, just straightened it out. In other words, how can we entertain such thoughts of transgression and disrespect from this child? The Bachor is supposed to lead by example, showing respect, not trying to supplant or overtake. We move on. Shimon and Levi, you are brothers. Kol Hamas, a word we've heard a lot lately. Mecheroteim, stolen instruments are their weapons. And we know that Shimon and Levi will have the plot against all of Shechem and against Yosef. So they are plotting disaster, which again is not the hope of any parent, not in our context at least. Rashi refers this back to Esav's blessing, having craft, being crafty, being able to form things, but not to enable the development of what should be, but what one wants it to be instead. Yaakov continues, let my soul not enter their council. My honor you will not join to your assembly, because they killed a man. This reference is to Hamar and the men of Shechem and all of them. And again, this is not the aspirational idea that Yaakov wants his sons to be remembered for. Then he goes on, Arur apam, cursed be their wrath, for it is Oz, mighty. A linguistic piece, Oz is often used to indicate positive strength. In fact, that was the word earlier when it said, Reuven, you are supposed to be my strength, Ezi. But here, it is being indicated as the strength is in the wrath and their anger, because it is harsh. I will separate them throughout Jacob, and I will scatter them all through Israel. It's their wrath that Yaakov is focusing on here, not the actual deed, which is horrible. If you think about it, the whole idea of do we hold people accountable for thoughts? But thoughts here obviously lead to actions. And when is a thought or when is a word to be adjudicated as leading directly to an action that is destructive? Again, something that we are dealing with in our lives today in a very real way. And so it will go through all the brothers. And these final words, when we think of what a blessing is or what a father says to his children as he feels he is passing on the generations to them, may not make much sense. Are these the words that a parent wants to bestow upon their children at the end of their life? Aviva Zornberg makes a powerful suggestion regarding what is actually transpiring at this moment, and we will learn from her. She says, Jacob wanted to reveal the end. This is the moment when Yaakov calls his children around his deathbed and proclaims his intent to speak to them of the last things. Yaakov calls his sons and says, come together. This is chapter 49, verses 1 through 2, that I may tell you what is to befall you at the end of days. What follows is a description of each son as they are in reality. There is no eschatological reference. It is this discontinuity between Yaakov's preamble and the content of his speech that generates the midrashic narrative. What did he mean? How do we parse the words to see what he's really saying? Rashi quotes the midrash. He sought to reveal the end, and the presence of God departed from him. And he began to say other things. So Rashi, who again wants to defend the good and vilify the bad, is saying Yaakov didn't even know what he was saying. Remember, he's blind at this point. He's impaired at this point. He can't remember. Yosef will have to come when he goes to bless Menashe and Ephraim and correct the blessings. The whole deathbed speech, teaches Aviva, is, as it seems, a diversion from Yaakov's original intent. It bears at best an oblique relation to the final meanings that Yaakov would have wished to communicate to his children. You should have been my strength. You should have been the ones that could have used your power for good things. The other things that he finds himself telling his children are quite different from the final things he had projected. This is what will befall you in the final days. So maybe, to add a lens to this, the idea is that before we can think about our aspirational blessings for what we hope for our children, we need to see them. We need to acknowledge their limitations. We need to appreciate and value their differences and understand that they are not going to continue in the model that perhaps we have fashioned for them, but they will go in their own directions. At the end of it all, they will be who they will be. if we look at it this way, then we can come back to Aviva and continue with her. She says, Yaakov refers to scenarios that will unfold later in time. He is looking ahead, not just to his children, but he's also looking beyond that to the generations that will come afterwards, and therefore the role that his children will play. And maybe, again, if I can add, the notion is that if he brings to the forefront the reality now, they will be able to acknowledge who they are, do whatever tikkunim need to be done, recalibrate, fix, whatever, and move on. The Sfat Emet makes a very powerful suggestion. To reveal the end, says the Sfat Emet, is merely to communicate the idea of ultimate harmony. In other words, the idea that the aspiration, what should have been, and the reality will somehow meet, will somehow come together. Again, we've seen this theme throughout VaYechi, hoping for unity, acknowledging disparate parts, hopefully bringing them back together. It is to convince Yaakov's children, who are on the verge of exile and diffusion and about to lose any sense of autonomy, of the intelligibility of their destiny, that their experience really does have a ketz, an order, a division. Remember that from Iketz? It has an inflection point, moving toward meaning. Yaakov's children will ultimately have to live the absurdity and pain of their reality. In this, Yaakov has a vision that it is in its very luminousness that prevents him from speaking it. In other words, he might see what is coming, but it is so luminous, it is so bright, it is so blinding that he gets confused. And that's where I think Aviva brings Rashi back into this reality of the confusion that's happening, while not whitewashing or really even dismissing Yaakov's words. We learn in Bereshit Rabbah, this is like the king's friend who was about to depart from the world, and his children were gathered around his bed. He says to them, "Come, I'm going to reveal to you secrets of the king." He raises his eyes and saw the king, and then he tells them, "Beware of the glory of this king." So Yaakov, our father, raised his eyes and saw the presence of God standing over him. And as the Bereshit Rabbah explains, he then says, "Beware the glory of God." In other words, whatever confusion is there in our limited human reality, be it the sons, be it Yaakov, God knows. God understands what will happen. And then at that moment, perhaps there's clarity for Yaakov as he realizes the limited part he plays in this eternal story, and by association, the limited part that his sons will play in this thing as well. No one person can be everything. We all have our aspirations, but we will reach them only as limited by our reality. We all know the statement, "Lo alecha melacha ligmor v'lo ata ben chorin lehivatal mimena." You are not required to do it all, to be everything to all people at all times. We can't do that. Only God does that. God is the one who is omnipresent, omniscient, and omnipresent, and omnipotent. We are not. Maybe this is the point, that each of us have our own personality elements, and we are to use them to the best of our abilities while remembering the limits. One can certainly wonder if Yaakov felt he had learned to do so himself, or if his blessings to his sons was reflecting unfinished business he had within himself. Sorenberg also points out that this is the first time we see illness and time in preparation for death. To what degree does Yaakov know what he wanted to impart to his sons and what ultimately was different in his actual words. Remember, there's not complete clarity here, as there was not when he mixed up the blessings for Ephraim or Manasseh, evoking the mixing up of the blessings of Yitzchak for Yaakov and his brother Esau, by the way. Each supposedly is the recipient of the blessing for the other. But if God intends all, and we ultimately get what God intends for us, then God is overriding what the individual thinks the blessings are for each of their children. Alternatively, does Hashem direct his hand and words here for more powerful purposes than one could consider would have happened as well? In our Haftarah in chapter 2 of Malachim Aleph, we read as follows: Vayikrevu yemei David lamut, vayitzavet Shlomo beno lemor. David's days come near that he's going to die, and he charges Shlomo, saying, Anochi olech b'derech kol haaretz v'chazakta vayita leish. I am going the way of all earth. You shall be strong, therefore, and be a man. Clearly, this is aspirational, not what should have been, but this is his charge to him. Transitions in our texts are always significant as the legacies to be bestowed are indicated. Here, David acknowledges that he is going into the permanence of the earth while leaving his son in the temporal state of being human, telling him, be strong, for you are a man. V'chazakta v'hayita le'ish. He needs to be able to do that. Notice that he will need to do that. And in acknowledging that need, perhaps that will give him strength, not platitudes, but the reality of his situation. Like Yaakov in our Parsha, he knows what is happening. And the question that we can ask is, does he get to say what he wants to say, avoiding the confusion that some of our Midrashim and Rashi and Aviva Zornberg point out? He goes on, V'shamarta et mishmeret Hashem Elokecha, l'lecha b'darcho, l'shmor chokotav v'mitzvotav v'mishpatav v'edotav kekatuv b'torat Moshe l'ma'an taskir et kol asher ta'aseh ve'kol asher tiknesha. Keep the charge, guard the ways of the Lord your God, to walk in God's ways, to keep God's statutes, God's commandments, God's judgments, God's testimonies, as it is written in the law of Moshe, that you may prosper in all that you do and wherever you turn. That the Lord may continue God's word, which he spoke concerning me, saying, if your children take heed in their way, to walk before me in truth, with all their heart, with all their soul, there will not fail you. They will be a man, ish, same word, that limited human on the throne. Now specifics. Shlomo will have to complete unfinished business. Whereas Yaakov might have been wrestling within himself of did he complete his own business, or looking at the aspirations of his children and then acknowledging their limitations that will not allow them to reach those heights that he had hoped for them. You know, the doctor always wanting his son to be the doctor. Here, what we have is we acknowledge what David could not do. And that is passed on to his son. His son will be the one who will build the temple. His son is the one in whom hopes for unity will be founded, although we acknowledge as we go through history that's not going to last very long. We are taught here, anything worthwhile will take more time to complete. We all know the saying, if it's worthwhile and it stays, it will take more than a generation to happen. One generation always leaves work to be done by the following one. Lo alechem lachali more. Again, as Yaakov also refers to future events at points, we see this notion of the life that will be ending and how the work of that life will be continued through the next generation. In this way, we understand that David will not build a temple, and that indeed it is his son who will be empowered to do so. And we all know the reason. Blood is on his hands. He was a warrior, all of that. But again, looking beyond the present moment and seeing the larger picture. He goes on and he cites the unfinished business. He says to Shlomo, "You know what Yoav, the son of Zeruiah, did to me, and what he did to the two captains of the hosts of Israel, to Avner, to the son of Ner, and to Amasa, the son of Yetar, whom he slew and shed the blood of these people in peace. And you will do according to your wisdom. You will exact justice. Don't let him die a natural death. Rather, realize what he has to be held accountable for." But then he goes on, he says, "Show kindness to the children of Barzillai, the Gileadite, and let them be those who eat at your table. For they befriended me when I fled from Absalom, your brother." So here, David is very clear in saying, Shlomo, this is what I did, this is what I didn't do, this is what I need you to do to finish my business, and then you can do your business. It's more of a plan than you will not be able to be all that I had hoped you could be because of the things that you did. You are a wise man, David says. Turn your attention to find solutions to the problems. Shlomo is being enjoined here to right the wrongs that David suffered from. I need you to finish my work. And we then read, Vayishkav David im avatav v'yikaber be'ir David. He dies, he sleeps with his fathers, and he's buried in the city of David. Shlomo then sits on the throne, and his kingdom was firmly established. Until it wasn't, as we know. This kingdom will divide in the next generation, and fracture will once again be part of the narrative of the Jewish nation. Perhaps this is the true lesson here. No one person can be everything and do it all. Instead, we are each individuals with strengths and weaknesses. Some of us fulfill our parents' wishes, some of us don't. Some of us bestow wishes upon our children that they will fulfill, sometimes they don't. And there's all kinds of reasons for that. We respond to our realities and history within the context of our lives. And so none of our stories are perfect. Maybe this is the point of Yaakov's blessings. Statements about truly seeing and acknowledging and even appreciating each of his children and trying to give them a realistic read on what they can expect in the future, as well as recalibrating what can be expected of them. These statements may not always feel like blessings, as we think of that conventionally. But perhaps the real bracha is being able to see, acknowledge, and adjust to the reality that confronts us. This seems like a most appropriate message as we read about the passage of one generation to the next. And at this moment in our lives, when 1 year moves into the next, we have reached a ketz. We have reached an end, a transition, an inflection point. And we say, Chazak, Chazak, v'nit chazek, as we come to the end of the story of our patriarchs and matriarchs. And with that, I wish all a Shabbat Shalom and a meaningful 2024 and continued prayers for all of Israel and all innocent victims of vicious terrorism in our way to broken world. I'll see you in 3 weeks. Lihitraat.